The mining ship, Perseverance, cut through the void between stars, its hull scarred from countless asteroid impacts and solar storms. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, watching the readings from their latest sensor sweep of the Kepler 442 system. The crew had been in space for 8 months now, following mineral surveys that promised rich deposits of rare Earth elements on the system's outer planets. "Captain, we're picking up something unusual on Kepler 442c, reported Lieutenant Martinez from the sensor station. "It's not geological. Looks like artificial structures?" Sarah moved to look over his shoulder at the display. The planet below was a barren wasteland of red rock and methane storms, completely unsuitable for most known forms of life. Yet there, clear as day, were the unmistakable geometric patterns of constructed buildings. "Any signs of active technology? Power readings?" she asked. "Negative, Captain. Whatever's down there has been dead for a long time. But the structures are massive. Some of them are easily the size of football stadiums." Sarah felt the familiar tingle of discovery that had driven her to become an explorer rather than staying safely in Earth's solar system. "Prep the shuttle. I want a closer look." 2 hours later, Sarah led a small landing team through the ruins of what had clearly once been a significant settlement. The buildings were constructed from a dark, crystalline material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered many of the walls, unlike anything in their xenolinguistics databases. "Captain, you need to see this," called Dr. James Wright, the team's xenobiologist. He was standing at the edge of what appeared to be a large crater in the center of the settlement. Sarah approached and peered down into the depression. At the bottom, nearly 30 feet down, something moved. Something alive. The creature was enormous, easily 12 feet tall even while lying on its side. Its hide was a mottled gray-brown, covered in thick leathery skin that hung in loose folds. 4 massive legs ended in broad, padded feet, while a long, trunk-like appendage extended from what was presumably its head. Most striking were the tusks, not 2 like an earth elephant, but 6 curved ivory spires that jutted out at irregular angles, giving it a fearsome appearance. "My God," whispered Dr. Wright. "It's still alive down there." The creature's breathing was labored, and even from their distance, they could see it was severely malnourished. Its ribs showed clearly through the saggy skin, and its trunk moved weakly as it tried to lift its massive head. "How long do you think it's been trapped down there?" asked Martinez. "Based on the crater formation and the settlement's decay, possibly decades," Wright replied. "I don't understand how it survived." Sarah studied the creature carefully. Despite its intimidating appearance, there was something almost sad about it. The way it lay there, barely moving, reminded her of footage she'd seen of abandoned animals in Earth's shelters. "Can we get it out?" she asked. Wright looked at her in surprise. "Captain, we don't know anything about this species. It could be dangerous, could carry diseases, could be dying," Sarah interrupted. "Look at it, James. When's the last time you saw something that looked that defeated?" The creature's large, dark eyes opened as if it had heard her voice. They were remarkably intelligent eyes, she noticed, with an almost human-like depth of expression. For a moment, their gazes met across the void, and Sarah felt an unexpected connection. "Sir, I'm reading some unusual energy signatures from the creature," reported Lieutenant Martinez, checking his scanner. "It's faint, but there's definitely some kind of bioelectrical activity beyond normal life signs." Sarah made her decision. "Get the heavy lift cables from the shuttle. We're getting it out of there." It took 3 hours to safely extract the creature from the crater. Throughout the process, it remained calm and cooperative, almost as if it understood they were trying to help. When the cables finally lifted it to ground level, they could see the full extent of its size and the strange beauty hidden beneath its intimidating exterior. The creature's hide wasn't just gray, it had intricate patterns of darker and lighter patches that seemed to shift in the alien sunlight. Its trunk was incredibly dexterous, with what appeared to be manipulator appendages at the end that looked almost like fingers. The tusks, while fearsome, were carved with delicate designs that spoke of intelligence and artistry. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly, approaching slowly with her hands visible and empty. The creature's trunk extended toward her, stopping just short of touching. Dr. Wright tensed, ready to intervene, but Sarah remained still. After a moment, the creature's trunk gently touched her outstretched hand. The contact sent a jolt through her, not painful, but electric. Suddenly, her mind was filled with images, memories that weren't her own. She saw vast cities of crystal and light, filled with beings that looked like this creature but smaller, more graceful. She saw celebrations, art, music that resonated through the ground rather than the air. She saw families, communities, love. Then came darker images, ships descending from the sky, carrying beings that were unmistakably advanced. Tall, slender creatures with technology that dwarfed even humanity's capabilities. She saw the crystalline cities burning, saw the creature's people being herded onto ships like cattle, and she saw this particular creature being left behind, abandoned because it was different. Larger, with more tusks, with skin that hung differently than the others. The connection broke, leaving Sarah gasping. The creature stepped back, its intelligent eyes watching her carefully. "What happened?" Dr. Wright asked, scanning her with his medical tricorder. It showed me. Its people were enslaved, taken by someone else. But not this one. They left it behind because..." Sarah struggled with the implications of what she'd seen. "Because it didn't look like the others. Because they thought it was ugly." The creature made a low rumbling sound, its trunk curling in what seemed like distress. Sarah realized it had understood her words. "You understand us, don't you?" she said gently. The creature's great head nodded slowly. Dr. Wright ran his scanners over the creature more thoroughly. "Captain, these readings are incredible. The bioelectrical activity I detected earlier, it's not just electrical. This creature is generating what appears to be quantum field fluctuations. I've never seen anything like it in a biological organism." "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure yet, but the energy patterns are consistent with some of the theoretical frameworks for faster-than-light communication and possibly even matter manipulation." Sarah looked at the creature with new understanding. "They didn't just abandon you because of how you looked, did they? They were afraid of what you could do." The creature's eyes seemed to brighten, and it nodded again. Over the following hours, as the team set up a temporary camp, Sarah found herself drawn to the creature again and again. Through their strange mental connection, she began to piece together its story. Its name was something like Korthak, though the translation was imperfect. It was indeed different from its people, a genetic anomaly that had been born with capabilities far beyond the norm. While its people were naturally talented artists and architects, Korthak could manipulate matter at the quantum level, could sense things across vast distances, could even affect the flow of time in small ways. But its appearance, the extra tusks, the loose skin, the larger size, had marked it as an outcast from birth. When the hegemony, the galaxy's dominant alliance of species, had come to claim its people for their aesthetic beauty and artistic abilities, they had taken one look at Korthak and declared it too ugly, too brutal-looking for their purposes. They wanted a beautiful, docile species to serve as living art pieces in their capital cities, Sarah told her crew that evening as they shared rations around a portable heater. Korthak lay nearby, finally beginning to look healthier after receiving water and some improvised nutrition. But Korthak didn't fit their image, so they just left it here to die. "That's horrible," said Martinez. "How long has it been alone?" Sarah consulted her mental connection with Korthak. 43 years. Dr. Wright looked up from his analysis of Korthak's biological samples. "Captain, I need to show you something. These quantum field readings aren't just impressive. They're off the charts. If my calculations are correct, this creature could potentially manipulate matter at the subatomic level. It could theoretically reshape elements, create complex machinery from raw materials, even generate localized gravity fields. And the hegemony just threw that away because it wasn't pretty enough for their standards? It appears so." Sarah stood up and walked over to Korthak, who lifted its massive head to watch her approach. She placed her hand on its trunk again and immediately felt the warm pulse of its consciousness touching hers. Through the connection, she shared something new: images of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, of their willingness to see beauty in the unexpected and to value substance over appearance. She showed it the crew of the Perseverance, humans who had traveled across the galaxy not for conquest or beauty, but for knowledge and discovery. Korthak's response was a wave of hope mixed with disbelief. It had spent so long believing itself worthless, unwanted, that the idea of a species that might value it for what it could do rather than reject it for how it looked was almost incomprehensible. "Come with us," Sarah said aloud, her words carrying the weight of her genuine invitation through their mental link. "Come to Earth. Meet our people. You don't have to be alone anymore." For the first time in 43 years, Korthak felt something it had almost forgotten existed: hope. Its trunk reached out and gently wrapped around Sarah's arm in what she realized was its species equivalent of a handshake or hug. The rescue mission had turned into something far more significant. They weren't just saving a life, they were giving a chance for an entirely new kind of relationship between species, one built on acceptance rather than prejudice, on capability rather than appearance. As the team prepared to transport Korthak to their ship, none of them realized they were about to discover just how powerful their new companion truly was, or how desperately the galaxy would soon need those very abilities the hegemony had been too blind to see. 3 weeks after leaving Kepler 442c, the Perseverance had become a different ship. The cargo bay had been converted into a living space for Korthak, though the massive creature spent most of its time in the main corridors, having quickly learned to navigate the ship's passages with surprising grace, despite its size. Captain Sarah Chen watched from the bridge as Dr. Wright conducted another session with Korthak in the ship's laboratory. Through the viewport, she could see the creature delicately manipulating a broken piece of mining equipment with its trunk while Wright took readings on his instruments. "The precision is unbelievable," Wright's voice came through the comm. "It's rebuilding the molecular structure of the damaged circuits without any tools, just by touching them. The quantum field fluctuations are rewriting the material at the atomic level." Sarah smiled as she watched Korthak carefully hand the fully repaired device back to Wright. Over the past weeks, the creature had shown an eagerness to help that touched her heart. It seemed to take genuine joy in fixing things, in making broken systems work again. Lieutenant Martinez looked up from his navigation station. "Captain, we're receiving a priority message from Earth Command. It's urgent." Sarah's good mood evaporated as she read the transmission. The message was brief, but terrifying. Alien ships had appeared in the Sol system. Massive vessels unlike anything in human databases, demanding Earth's immediate surrender. They claimed humanity had stolen property belonging to the galactic hegemony. "Get Dr. Wright and Korthak up here immediately," Sarah ordered. When they arrived on the bridge, Korthak took one look at the tactical display showing the alien fleet and let out a low, mournful sound. Through their mental connection, Sarah felt waves of fear and guilt from the creature. "You know who they are," she said. Korthak nodded slowly. Images flowed through their link. Memories of the same sleek, crystalline ships that had taken its people decades ago. The hegemony had come for it. But why now? Dr. Wright asked. And why Earth? Through Korthak, Sarah began to understand. The hegemony had monitoring systems throughout the galaxy, always watching for signs of their escaped property. When Korthak had used its abilities to repair the ship's systems over the past weeks, those quantum signatures had been detected. The hegemony had tracked them back to Earth. They don't care about Earth, Sarah realized aloud. They just want Korthak back. To them, it's stolen property that wandered off. The comm system crackled to life with an incoming transmission from the lead hegemony vessel. The voice that came through was melodious but cold, speaking in perfect English that their translation systems had clearly mastered. Primitive species of Sol 3, you are harboring stolen hegemony property. Surrender the deviant creature you have taken, and your world will be spared. Refuse, and we will take it by force. Sarah looked at Korthak, seeing the resignation in its ancient eyes. Through their connection, she felt its willingness to sacrifice itself to save Earth. It had already begun moving toward the shuttle bay. No, Sarah said firmly, both aloud and through their mental link. You're not property. You're not going back to them. She opened a channel to the hegemony ship. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Perseverance. The being you're referring to is not property. It's a sentient creature who came with us of its own free will. We refuse your demand. The response was immediate and threatening. You have 1 standard hour to comply, or we will demonstrate why the hegemony rules this galaxy. As if to punctuate the threat, the sensors showed one of the alien ships moving toward Earth's moon. A beam of energy lanced out, and suddenly, a crater the size of Australia appeared on the lunar surface. Dear God, whispered Martinez. Sarah felt Korthak's distress spike as it sensed the destruction, but beneath the fear, she felt something else. Anger. For the first time since she'd known the creature, Korthak was truly angry. The moon mining colonies, Wright said, scanning the readings. There were 3,000 people working on the far side. Were? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. The beam somehow transported them. They're gone, but I'm not reading any deaths. It's like they were teleported away. Through her connection, Sarah understood. The hegemony didn't typically kill, they collected. The humans from the moon had just become part of their vast slave empire, taken as a demonstration of their power. Korthak's rage continued to build. Sarah had never felt such fury from the gentle creature. It wasn't just anger at the hegemony. It was rage at itself for bringing this danger to the humans who had shown it kindness. Can we fight them? Sarah asked, looking at her tactical officer. With what? Our mining lasers against ships that can crack moons? Captain, we're outgunned by about 1,000,000 to 1. But Korthak had moved to the main console and was gently placing its trunk on the ship's central computer core. Suddenly, every system on the Perseverance began operating at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. What's it doing? Wright asked, watching his readings spike. Through their link, Sarah felt Korthak's plan forming. It was going to use its quantum manipulation abilities in ways it had never attempted before, not just to fix small devices, but to enhance an entire starship. It's upgrading us, Sarah breathed. It's rewriting our technology at the quantum level. The ship's hull began to shimmer as Korthak's influence spread through every system. The mining lasers transformed into something far more powerful, their energy output increasing by orders of magnitude. The shields, previously capable of deflecting asteroids, suddenly registered defensive capabilities that could theoretically withstand stellar-level energies. But the most remarkable change was in the ship's propulsion system. Korthak's quantum manipulation had turned their conventional drive into something that bent space-time itself. "Captain," Martinez said in amazement, "according to these readings, we can now move faster than light. Not just faster, we can be anywhere in this solar system instantaneously." Sarah felt Korthak's exhaustion through their link. This level of quantum manipulation was pushing even its incredible abilities to their limits. "Why?" she asked it through their connection. "Why risk everything for us?" The answer came not in words, but in pure emotion, gratitude, affection, and something deeper. For the first time in its life, Korthak had found beings who valued it for what it was, not what it looked like. Earth had become its home, and humans had become its family. The hegemony ships began moving toward Earth itself, clearly preparing for another demonstration of power. Sarah made her decision. "All hands, battle stations. We're going to show these aliens that humans don't abandon their family." What followed was unlike any space battle in human history. The enhanced Perseverance danced between the massive hegemony vessels like a hummingbird among eagles, its new propulsion system making it impossible to target. Each time the ship appeared near an enemy vessel, its transformed weapons cut through their shields like they were paper. But it was Korthak's direct manipulation of space-time that truly turned the tide. Working through the ship's systems, it began to affect the hegemony vessels themselves. Weapon systems failed as their molecular structures were rewritten. Engines shut down as their power cores were quantum shifted into inert matter. The hegemony ships found themselves helpless, drifting in space with all their systems neutralized but their crews unharmed. "Impossible," came the transmission from the lead ship. "No primitive species should possess such abilities." "We don't," Sarah replied. "But our friend does. And unlike you, we don't judge worth by appearance." Through their mental link, Korthak shared one final message with the hegemony fleet. A complex quantum communication that reached every being on every ship simultaneously. It was the story of its abandonment, its 43 years of solitude, and its rescue by humans. But more than that, it was a demonstration of what the hegemony had thrown away when they chose aesthetics over ability. The response from the fleet was stunned silence. Dr. Wright, monitoring the quantum transmissions, looked up at Sarah in amazement. "Captain, it's not just communicating with them. It's showing them how to replicate some of its abilities. It's trying to teach them." Sarah understood. Even after everything the hegemony had done, Korthak was offering them knowledge, offering to share rather than dominate. It was showing them a different way, the human way. The lead hegemony ship finally responded, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in the melodious voice. The creature offers to share its gifts freely?" "Its name is Korthak," Sarah replied. "And yes, unlike your empire, we believe in cooperation, not conquest." There was a long pause before the next transmission. "We must reconsider our position. The creature, Korthak, displays abilities beyond our understanding. Perhaps there is value in forms we had not previously recognized." Sarah felt Korthak's surprise through their connection. It had never expected the hegemony to be capable of admitting they were wrong. "The humans from the moon," Sarah demanded. "Return them." "They will be returned unharmed," came the reply. We wish to learn more about this new perspective." As the Perseverance watched, the hegemony fleet began to withdraw, but not before returning the displaced humans to lunar orbit in perfect health. The lead ship sent one final message. "Korthak of Earth, we acknowledge our error. Perhaps the hegemony has much to learn about true beauty." As the alien ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, Sarah put her hand on Korthak's trunk, feeling the creature's exhaustion, but also its profound satisfaction. It had not only saved Earth, but had possibly changed an entire galactic civilization's perspective on worth and beauty. "You did it," she told it through their link. You saved everyone! Korthak's response was simple. It had finally found its purpose, and it had found its home. But as the ship began its journey back to Earth, none of them realized that word of what had happened was already spreading through the galaxy, and that other species enslaved by the hegemony were beginning to hope that change might finally be possible. 6 months after the confrontation at Earth, the galaxy was changing in ways no one could have predicted. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Unity, watching as the massive space station that had grown around Earth's orbit bustled with activity from dozens of different species. What had started as humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had evolved into something far more significant. Word of Korthak's demonstration had spread through the hegemony's vast empire, reaching enslaved species on thousands of worlds. For the first time in centuries, the oppressed had hope. "Captain, we're receiving another group of refugees from the Zeta Reticuli system," reported Commander Martinez, who had been promoted after his exemplary service during the crisis. "That makes 47 ships this week." Sarah nodded, watching through the viewport as the latest group of alien vessels approached the station. These were Vorthak, a crystalline species that had been enslaved for their ability to grow living buildings. Like Korthak's people, they had been prized for their beauty and artistic abilities while being treated as decorative objects. "Have Dr. Wright and Korthak meet them at Docking Bay 7, she instructed. "They'll be frightened and confused." Over the past months, Korthak had become something it never imagined possible, a symbol of hope for the galaxy's oppressed species. Its story of abandonment and eventual acceptance had resonated across countless worlds where beings lived in slavery because their appearance or abilities made them valuable to the hegemony. Sarah made her way to the docking bay, arriving just as Korthak emerged from the station's corridors. The massive creature moved with more confidence now, its head held high instead of hanging in shame. The intricate patterns on its hide seemed brighter, and its 6 tusks had been polished until they gleamed like ivory sculptures. But the most remarkable change was in Korthak's eyes. Where once there had been resignation and loneliness, now there was purpose and hope. "The Vorthak are particularly traumatized," Dr. Wright explained as they walked. "They were used as living architecture in the hegemony's capital cities for over 3 centuries. Most of them don't even remember what it was like to make choices for themselves." When the airlock opened, the Vorthak refugees huddled together, their crystalline forms shimmering with fear. They were indeed beautiful. Tall, elegant beings whose semi-transparent bodies caught and refracted light in spectacular displays. But Sarah could see the psychological scars, the way they automatically arranged themselves in aesthetically pleasing patterns as if expecting judgment. Korthak approached slowly, and Sarah felt through their mental connection the creature's deep empathy for these beings. It understood their fear, their conditioning to believe they existed only to be beautiful for others. The lead Vorthak, a being whose crystal structure showed the blue-green of great age, looked up at Korthak with obvious confusion. Here was a creature that by hegemony standards was the opposite of beautiful, massive, asymmetrical, with rough hide and protruding tusks. Yet it moved with dignity and purpose. Korthak extended its trunk in the gentle greeting it had learned, and to everyone's surprise, made a sound none of them had heard before, a complex harmonic that resonated through the crystalline being's structures. The Vorthak's response was immediate and emotional. They began to sing, not with voices, but with their entire crystalline bodies creating music that filled the docking bay with ethereal beauty. "It's speaking to them in their own language," Wright realized. "It's learning to communicate with them the way it communicates with us." Through the mental connection, Sarah felt Korthak sharing its story with the Vorthak, not just the abandonment and loneliness, but the discovery that true worth came from what you chose to do, not what others expected you to be. The crystalline being's song changed, becoming something more complex, more hopeful. They were sharing their own stories in return. "Captain," came Martinez's voice over the comm, "we're receiving an urgent transmission from the Hegemony High Council. They're requesting immediate communication with you and Korthak." Sarah sighed. The Hegemony had been struggling with the changes Korthak had introduced to their society. Some factions wanted to continue the old ways, while others were beginning to see the value in cooperation over domination. "Patch them through to Conference Room Alpha," she replied. "We'll take it there." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from a holographic projection of 3 Hegemony Council members. The aliens were as beautiful as their reputation suggested, tall, slender beings with features that seemed designed by artists rather than evolution. Their skin had a luminous quality, and their movements were graceful to the point of being hypnotic. But Sarah had learned to look beyond their beauty to see the arrogance and entitlement that had driven their empire for millennia. Captain Chen, the central figure, spoke, its voice carrying musical undertones that were clearly meant to be persuasive. "The chaos your companion has introduced to our civilization must end. Productivity in our slave sectors has dropped by 60%. Art production has nearly ceased. The natural order is being disrupted." Korthak, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stood to its full, impressive height. Through their connection, Sarah felt its controlled anger at the casual mention of slave sectors. "The natural order?" Sarah replied. "You mean the order where you steal beings from their worlds and force them to create beauty for your pleasure?" "We provide purpose," the council member replied, clearly not understanding why this was objectionable. "These species excel at certain functions. We give them the opportunity to fulfill their potential. As slaves," Sarah said flatly, "as valued contributors to galactic civilization. The Vorthak create living architecture. The Melodians produce the most beautiful music in the galaxy. The Korthak people create sculptures that inspire entire worlds. This is their nature." Korthak's trunk touched Sarah's hand, and suddenly she was seeing through its memories again. But this time, the memories were new, recent communications it had received from across the galaxy. Enslaved species were not just running away. They were learning. Using the quantum manipulation techniques Korthak had shared, they were developing their own technologies, their own art, their own music that went far beyond what they had been forced to create for the hegemony. "Show them," Sarah said aloud. Korthak placed its trunk on the communication console and began transmitting. The holographic display filled with images from across the galaxy. Vorthak cities that grew wild and organic instead of following rigid aesthetic rules. Melodian music that incorporated sounds the hegemony had never allowed. Artwork from Korthak's people that expressed emotions and stories rather than just visual beauty. The council members watched in what appeared to be shock as they saw species they had enslaved for centuries, creating things they had never imagined possible. This is chaos," one of them whispered. "This is freedom," Sarah corrected. "This is what these species can accomplish when they're not forced to create only what you consider beautiful." "But it's... The lead council member struggled with words. "It's not what they're supposed to do." Korthak made a sound that Sarah had learned was its version of laughter. Through their connection, it shared its amusement at beings who could see quantum manipulation rewrite reality, but still couldn't understand that enslaved artists might have their own creative visions. "Council members," Sarah said carefully, "your empire is built on a fundamental misunderstanding. You see these species as beautiful objects that exist for your pleasure, but they're people with their own desires, their own creativity, their own worth that has nothing to do with what they can provide for you." The transmission was interrupted by alerts from across the station. Martinez's voice came over the comm with barely controlled excitement. Captain, you need to see this. We're receiving transmissions from the core hegemony worlds. The slave populations, they're not just escaping anymore. They're transforming their societies from within. On the main screen, they watched as reports came in from across the galaxy. On Hegemony Prime, the Vorthak, who had been forced to grow buildings for centuries, were now creating structures that expressed their own aesthetic vision. The buildings were still beautiful, but they were alive in ways the hegemony had never allowed, growing, changing, expressing the personalities of their creators. On the music world of harmony, the Melodians were composing symphonies that incorporated sounds from their homeworld, telling stories of their history that had been forbidden for generations. Even Korthak's own people, those who remained on hegemony worlds, were beginning to create sculptures that moved and changed, incorporating the quantum manipulation abilities they had learned from their abandoned sibling. The council members watched this transformation with obvious distress. Their perfect, controlled empire was becoming something wild and unpredictable. "You're destroying everything we've built," the lead member said, and for the first time there was desperation in the melodious voice. "No," Sarah replied gently. "We're helping you build something better." Korthak stepped forward and placed its trunk directly on the communication console. This time, instead of sharing memories or demonstrating abilities, it did something different. It opened its mind completely, showing the hegemony not just what freedom looked like, but what it felt like. Through Korthak's quantum connection, every being in the hegemony empire suddenly experienced a moment of perfect understanding, what it was like to create without restriction, to express themselves authentically, to be valued for their thoughts and feelings rather than their appearance or usefulness. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the galaxy, hegemony citizens who had spent millennia believing that order and beauty required control suddenly understood that true beauty came from authentic expression. The council members in the holographic projection seemed to age years in moments as they processed this revelation. "What have we done?" one of them whispered. "You made mistakes," Sarah said compassionately. "But mistakes can be corrected. Your empire doesn't have to end. It just has to change." Over the following hours, as reports continued to come in from across the galaxy, they watched the hegemony transform. It wasn't collapse or revolution. It was evolution. Species that had been enslaved were becoming partners. Art that had been controlled was becoming collaborative. The rigid hierarchy of the empire was reorganizing into something more flexible and inclusive. There was resistance, of course. Some hegemony worlds tried to maintain the old ways. But when beings had experienced true freedom, even for a moment, it was impossible to go back to slavery. Korthak, the creature that had been abandoned for being too ugly, had become the catalyst for the largest social transformation in galactic history. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they watched the final reports come in. The Hegemony High Council was officially dissolving itself, to be replaced by a cooperative alliance of all species. Through their connection, Korthak shared its vision of the future, a galaxy where worth was determined by character and choice rather than appearance, where cooperation replaced domination, where the diversity of different species was celebrated rather than exploited. "We go home," Sarah said, understanding. "All of us." As the Unity prepared to return to Earth, now the unofficial capital of a new galactic alliance, Sarah looked at her friend, the creature whose ugliness had hidden the most beautiful soul in the galaxy. "Thank you," she told it through their mental link. Korthak's response was pure contentment. For the first time in its long life, it truly belonged somewhere, and in teaching others about freedom, it had finally found its own. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.